Hi everyone, welcome to my channel, Tips and Tricks for Living a Copacetic Life. My name is Kristen Cole, I'm a clinical psychologist, and I would like to share with you some tips and tricks for coping with a pandemic lifestyle. I want you to know I have a bias towards science, so I'll be presenting to you evidence-based material related to the field of psychological science. I also will be focusing on coping rather than the tremendous grief that is a result of this pandemic. And I'll be focusing on tips for adults in particular, not necessarily children. However, some of these will definitely apply to children. This is a two-part series. In the first part, I'll be describing the chronic stress state, the negative impact physiologically it has on us, some warning signs of what's called pandemic burnout, and then some unhealthy coping styles that we might be currently using. Part 2 is going to be focusing on coping. I'll be sharing with you 50 tips and tricks for healthy coping during the pandemic lifestyle, and you'll be creating a plan of action. Here's a reality check. We are in a state of chaos in our lives. We have the global pandemic going on. There's been divisive political tension, civil unrest, historic size wildfires have been going on. We've been socially isolating to avoid acquiring the virus. The unemployment rates are skyrocketing as a result of the amount of jobs lost related to the pandemic, and we have stay-at-home orders at times. This is really a lot, and it's been going on for a long period of time, so we're in a chronic state of chaos in our lives. This is the really bad news. The good news is there's a lot we can do about it. How are you coping with COVID? Are you in denial? Are you hiding your head in the sand? Are you pretending it doesn't exist? Are you minimizing it as just a little flu that people get? Or are you really on the other side where you're in a complete state of panic? You're chronically stressed, you're always on edge, and very hypervigilant. Or are you in the middle where we do planning and figure things out? That's really where I want to encourage you to get yourself, rather than being in denial or being on that panicked scale. It would really be much healthier for your brain and your body to be in that middle place. So what is stress? Stress is a reaction that we have, and stressors are the events that cause that type of stress reaction. We react differently to stress, so our stress reaction can be different among different people. It shows up in a variety of ways, and then whether or not we react to an event as a stressor or interpret it as a stressor can also vary as well. The bottom line on stress is that life demands and changes and challenges tend to often be stressors, which can trigger stress. Let's have a look at some of the stressors that have been going on, particularly during this pandemic time. Having a medical illness or getting sick, having an injury, is a life change that can be a stressor for somebody and then cause that stress reaction. Being medically vulnerable means something very different during a pandemic, and there's a lot more concern for people with medical vulnerabilities. Going to a doctor or a dentist in and of itself can be a stressor. During a pandemic, it's even heightened because we're concerned if we're going to get exposed to the virus. Are we going to have to wait in a waiting room near people? Will we even have access to health care? After losing a job, perhaps we've lost our healthcare insurance or access to healthcare. It's quite a stressor. Trying to avoid COVID is a stressor. Living in a lifestyle of constantly washing your hands and keeping your mask on and being physically distanced is very inconvenient. Going to the store is inconvenient these days. You have to plan ahead and try and minimize the amount of times that you're in a store. Have your list ready, put your gear on with your mask, etc., and try and do your best to stay distanced physically from people while you're in a store. It's very inconvenient now. Transportation issues have changed and can be much more inconvenient these days. Parenting during a pandemic and being quarantined is very different. Not being able to get outside or have the kids in school while you get a break or you get to focus on your work. Losing jobs, very significant financial problems so many people are going through right now, not being able to gather socially, is a significant stressor. Our friends and family who are getting ill or perhaps who have died during the pandemic, either from COVID or from some other condition, that's really a huge stressor at another level because we can't gather together and have funerals or memorial services or celebrations of life like we used to, where we have large gatherings and people connect and share their experiences of a loved one. That's all changed right now. So that's very stressful. Losing a pet is stressful. And, especially if you've had a pet that's very close to you, having a conflict with another person or coworkers, partners, family members, bosses, all of these things are really significant stressors. Feeling lonely, which a lot of people are experiencing right now on so many levels. In particular, people who live alone are even more isolated than ever and feeling lonely. It's very difficult to go through the pandemic living alone. It's difficult to go through it living with a lot of people. It's just really difficult. Not being able to go on vacation and travel like you're used to is a huge disappointment and a life change. Spending the holidays alone, not being able to gather with your family and your friends, the increased responsibilities that you may have these days as someone who's perhaps taking care of a neighbor or running errands for that elderly neighbor so they don't have to go to the store, extra responsibilities of childcare or your work world. It can show up in a lot of different ways. So having an increased sense of responsibility, feeling disappointed in ourselves, in others, in the world. The social injustices that have continued to go on, the political divisiveness that's been expressed, at this great level, the political tension, all of this, these are all really significant life stressors. So what I encourage you to do is take a minute and pause the video so you can really note the ones that are significant for you. We'll be using that information in a little while. So what is chronic stress? What's the difference between stress and chronic stress? The good news is your brain and body is totally equipped to handle stress and to handle chronic stress. The issue is if we stay in a chronic stress state for too long, then it starts to wreak havoc on our brain and our body, and that's what we don't want. So I don't want you to be concerned that you looked at the list I just showed you and you're thinking, I checked off most of those boxes of what's going on in my life with these life changes. Does that mean my brain and my body is collapsing? No, but what it does mean is that you've got a lot of stressors. How you respond your stress in your stress response is really what's going to determine the impact that it has on your health. When we differentiate between stress and chronic stress, what we're talking about is that if the stressor has continued on a daily basis, constantly for over 6 months, that's considered a chronic stressor. So if you've been in a heightened stress state for over 6 months and you really haven't gotten a break physiologically, emotionally, cognitively, then you're in a chronic stress state. So think about that 6-month marker as what really defines the term chronic. What is pandemic burnout? It's the burnout as a result of having to be so cautious and deal with so much that I just listed on the slide prior. And I want you to think of it as a sense of exhaustion. So pandemic burnout is feeling mentally, physically, and emotionally exhausted as a result of going through these chronic stressors. It's that sense of just having nothing left. You're just exhausted mentally. You have no more capacity to think and problem solve. You're exhausted physically. You just want to collapse and sleep for a long period of time. You're exhausted emotionally. You can't hear one more sad story or listen to one more anxious person because you're just so exhausted. You have nothing left. That is pandemic burnout. Well, the good news is that our brain and body is very resilient and can handle a lot of chronic stress. And the way we do that is we adapt into we react and get into what's called survival mode. So you may have heard the difference between surviving and thriving. Survival mode was when the pandemic hit and people got into the state of assessing what's the danger for me, What do I need? What do I need to prepare to be able to get through this pandemic? So in the beginning of the pandemic, you saw people going through their cupboards and determining how much food do I have? What do I need? What kinds of supplies do I need? What kinds of medical supplies do I need? Do I have enough medicine to last me several months? Do I have enough batteries for the devices that I need batteries for? Do I have enough supplies to get me and my family or the people that I live with through the next several months? So there was this assessment period, and that's where you saw people running to the stores and getting basic supplies and stores running out of things that they weren't really expecting to run out of. So that's survival mode. That's a really good thing. It helps us survive. On the opposite end of surviving is thriving. Thriving is when things are going great, the stars have aligned, our lifestyle is very comfortable, and we're really prospering emotionally, mentally, physically, financially, interpersonally. So this is really the two opposite sides. We've got the surviving side and the thriving side. Right now, because of the period of time we've been in the pandemic, if you're still in survival mode, it's likely to take a toll on your mind and your body, and it's important to move out of survival mode. However, it's very unrealistic to expect us to be in the thriving mode. Most people are not thriving. There are some people that are getting through this pandemic comfortably. Most people are not. So I think to expect ourselves to thrive, okay, I got to get out of survival because that's not good for me. I need to thrive. That idea is pretty unrealistic. Most of us are just not going to thrive right now. And so what I want to encourage you to do is think about what we never talk about, and that's being in the middle. In the middle is called adapting. How do I adapt to the pandemic? How do I make shifts in my life, in my attitude, in my approach that will keep me healthy in the long haul? There is light at the end of the tunnel. Vaccines are here. They're starting to be distributed. There's light at the end of the tunnel. However, we're still in the tunnel, and we're going to be in the tunnel for quite a while. How do we adapt to being in this tunnel? That's the focus. If we don't adapt and we stay in survival mode and that chronic stress state, there are some pretty significant physiological costs. What happens is these stressors activate our sympathetic nervous system. That's the part of us that you know of as fight or flight. So somebody jumps out at me in the dark, and I immediately respond by my physiology and my mindset changing, and I don't even have to think about it. It's automatic. So the sympathetic nervous system will get me ready to either fight off whoever's jumping out at me or to run away from whoever's jumping out at me. Now, some people freeze. That does happen as well. So the sympathetic nervous system is what's keeping us alive. It makes us jump when a car's about to hit us or something bad's about to happen to us physically. It changes our physiology to be able to deal with that danger. It's a good thing. Once the danger's over, the parasympathetic nervous system settles us all back down, and we get into that homeostasis, that average place that we normally hang out for health. And that's all good. However, when we have chronic stress, that fight or flight system is activated so often for such a long period of time, what will happen is it triggers the pituitary and adrenal glands to elevate cortisol. Cortisol is a very wonderful substance that's in our brain and our body, and it's essentially an anti-inflammatory. It's a good thing. It has a lot of different jobs. However, when cortisol levels are severely elevated chronically, meaning over 6 months, it starts to wreak havoc on the brain and the body. It will start to attack a part of the brain called the hippocampi, or the hippocampus is the singular terminology. And the hippocampus is really important for learning and memory and understanding spatial navigation, so being able to get from one place to another. What happens with chronic stress on a really high level for long periods of time is the elevated cortisol starts to deteriorate at those areas of the hippocampus, and we can start to have memory problems as a result. Now, I don't want you to start panicking, thinking, okay, I've been stressed for many, many months and my brain is dissolving. That's not happening. Your brain is really, really resilient. The point here is that we don't want to stay in this chronic state because it makes our brain more vulnerable to these kinds of costs. The other thing that can happen is the high levels of cortisol can decrease our immunity system, and that lower immunity makes us more susceptible to illnesses, to viruses, to environmental substances that are coming at us all the time that normally our immune system just kicks away and we move on and we're fine. So it doesn't mean that high stress causes cancer. The connection here is that high chronic states of stress elevates cortisol, and when cortisol stays elevated too high, it can decrease our immunity, and it's that vulnerability of having a lower immunity that can make us more susceptible to cancer. The other thing that is related is heart attacks. So you may have heard that stress causes heart attacks. In fact, stress does not cause heart attacks. High levels of chronic stress causes high levels of cortisol. High levels of cortisol over long periods of time starts to clog arteries, and it's the clogged arteries that can trigger heart disease or a heart attack. And so you can see the very significant costs related to these high levels of cortisol. It also can impact fertility and libido or sex drive. High levels of cortisol start to decrease the production of testosterone, and that can lead to fertility or sex drive issues. So we're not really getting away with it as well as we think we are when we're in a chronic stressed state. Here are some other ways in which high levels of cortisol and chronic stress can affect our body. It can start to affect our skin. We can start to have intestinal problems. It can start to create problems with our joints and our muscles. And so there are lots of different ways that those levels of high chronic stress can start to affect the body and the mind. What are your warning signs of being in a chronic stress state? Here are some. Feeling overwhelmed. I think it's pretty easy to feel overwhelmed right now. Feeling anxious and worried. Experiencing what's called anhedonia. This is a fancy way of saying that we no longer experience pleasure in the things that we used to enjoy. So if you used to enjoy riding your bike, with anhedonia, you really don't enjoy it anymore. It's not fun for you anymore. If you never liked riding a bike, then that's not anhedonia. So you have to think about, what have I enjoyed in life, and am I still enjoying those things? Feeling emotionally numb. There's just so much going on right now that a lot of us feel emotionally numb. Crying, feeling a sense of despair, feeling resentment. I'm hearing a lot of resentment lately during the pandemic. And I hear about it in two interesting ways. On one hand, I'm hearing about people who feel a lot of resentment for having to go through the pandemic, resentment that they have to wear a mask, resentment that they are having to wash their hands so much, resentment that things are inconvenient, that their business is suffering as a result of the pandemic. So lots of resentment around the pandemic and the consequences of the pandemic. I'm also hearing a lot of people feeling resentment toward others during the pandemic. So perhaps you're someone who really is doing all the right things according to the public health officials. You're wearing your mask, you're sanitizing your hands, you are staying physically distanced so that you don't expose others or get exposed. You're limiting your contact out in public. You're doing all the right things. And then you look out and see people who aren't doing those things and feel resentment toward them, resentment toward people who aren't wearing masks, who aren't being careful, who are gathering at holidays, and you're not able to because you're choosing to not do it in order to stay safe, feeling resentful that they are, or looking at somebody's social media post and they look like they're thriving. Their life looks completely unaffected by the pandemic. And so feeling resentment in that regard as well. So resentment can show up in a number of different ways. Perhaps you're someone who doesn't usually make mistakes, really careful about all the things you do, and now you're starting to make mistakes. That could be a warning sign of chronic stress. Perhaps you're somebody who's typically very compassionate. You're very sensitive and very empathic, and you're really lacking compassion these days. It's really, you sort of hit your limit, you're done. Perhaps you're doing okay during the pandemic and you are maintaining your financial status, your work, your health, your connection with the people you're living with, and perhaps you're seeing so many people suffering to such incredible degrees that you're feeling guilty about what you have or feeling guilty that you're doing okay and really questioning, do I have the right to feel happy when there's so much suffering out there in the world? Perhaps your attitude's shifted and you're really cynical, just feeling really negative and not having a lot of hope. Perhaps you're withdrawing socially, and I don't mean the physical distance that we're supposed to have of 6 feet or more in order to stop the transmission of the virus. I think it's really misleading that the media and the public has been using the term social distancing. Social distancing, social connection, a lack of social connection or social withdrawal is the last thing we need right now during a pandemic. And social confinement leads to brain atrophy. So it's not just an emotional impact, it leads to brain atrophy. So we want people to stay socially connected but physically distanced. Feeling rageful. We are seeing more road rage on the highways these days. Feeling doubting yourself, and maybe you're typically a pretty confident person, having nightmares, etc. There's a big list. I'm going to show you a list of warning signs for chronic stress, and I want you to pay attention and look through them carefully to see which ones apply for you. I'm going to ask you to pause the video and really go through each of these one by one and make a notation of which of these symptoms of stress are relevant for you. So go ahead and pause the video and take a moment to do that. You'll be using this information to create your self-care plan. All right, now that you have made your list, did you notice a pattern? I'm curious, how do you react to stress? Go through the list that you just created for yourself and notice if you typically react in a more emotional way. So did you notice a lot of the symptoms that you're relating to have to do with your emotional reaction? Or are you more of a physical reactor? You had a lot of those medical conditions and physical responses to stress. Or are you more of a cognitive reactor? So that is impacting you in the way of your thinking. It's hard for you to concentrate and focus and really retain a lot of information. So notice if there's a pattern. The reason why it's helpful for you to know if you have a pattern is that's going to be your warning sign. That's really, really obvious if you're willing to pay attention. So if you're a physical reactor, for example, your body is the most incredible, powerful tool you have for knowing when you're stressed. A lot of times we're ignoring our stress warning signs, and it's not until we're really at that chronic state that we realize, hey, maybe I'm stressed and I should do something about it. If you react physically and you know that about yourself, let your body be your alarm system that says, hey, the stomach's upset these days. I wonder if I'm stressed out, what's going on? And then it can be your barometer of how you're doing with your stress. So notice if you had a pattern. Some people don't have a pattern. You just really react all over the board. And so there's not going to be one real obvious way for you to be focusing on your warning signs. You'll have to be paying attention to a lot of different areas. What I'd like you to do is think about which activities are making you feel burnt out right now. Are you having too much exposure to the news? There's a lot of negativity and divisiveness in the news. There's a lot of sensationalism and drama. There's a lot of tragedy, true tragedy in the news. There's a lot of misinformation in the news. And so are you getting so much news exposure on a constant basis because you want to be informed, but perhaps you're over-informed, and that exposure to the negativity is having an impact on your state of stress? That's something to really seriously consider. Are you exposed to too much social media? Do you get notifications and alerts every time somebody posts something on their social media? Are you following just so many people on social media, maybe watching what they're doing and having reactions to what they're doing? That's creating a stress response for you. Are you getting too many emails? So many people have had to shift the work that they do have into a remote format. So are you getting bombarded by emails now, and that's just overload? It just keeps coming at you, and it just feels like a never-ending stream of information coming at you, and hard to manage. Are you getting constant notifications on your phone? Do you have your devices set up so that every time something happens, you get some notification? That can trigger your sympathetic nervous system. So it's like really hitting that alarm bell in your brain every time a news flash comes up or something negative comes through a notification. So think about how that's impacting your state of stress. Are you experiencing role fatigue? This is really significant to the pandemic lifestyle where we're taking on more roles than we normally would have. You have a role perhaps as a parent, as a worker, as a partner, and now you're having to take on the role of a teacher or a caregiver of somebody or a provider. So there are many roles that we're taking on now that we weren't really involved in as much during the pandemic. Is that exhausting you? Are you in too many Zoom or video meetings? Do you have overload of the amount of time you're connecting with people through Zoom or the video conferencing tools that are out there? Is that exhausting you? You know, there are a lot of articles written on a lot of these activities burning people out. Are you working without breaks? For people who are able to work from home, there is a difficult line between your home life and your work life when your computer is right there or your work is right there. So if you're bored and you're not really sure what to do, you might think, well, I just will work anyway, or you're not taking your breaks during work. You're getting caught up in work. So that could certainly be leading to burnout as well. Are you sleeping well or are you not sleeping so well? Not sleeping well is a very significant contributor to burnout. And are you isolating too much? Because of the pandemic, perhaps this is a physically healthy thing for you to do, but socially you're isolating too. Or are you spending way too much time with the people that you're living with and you just don't even get a break? That can burn people out as well. So I want you to think about the activities in your life that are contributing to you feeling burnt out. Let's have a look at some unhealthy coping styles that you might be involved in right now as a result of going through this pandemic lifestyle. Are you using nicotine or caffeine? People who have anxiety have no business using nicotine and caffeine. They are stimulants and they mimic the experience of anxiety. So if you're someone who's moving through this pandemic in a very anxious way, it's really important for you to pay attention to the impact that nicotine and caffeine you're using might be having on your anxiety and your stress state. A lot of people are increasing their alcohol use. There are plenty of articles coming out, scientific journal articles that are showing that adults are increasing the frequency of alcohol that they're using. Sometimes people cope with stress by numbing out through alcohol, through drugs, through over-the-counter drugs that have numbing agents to them. Are you responding by ignoring your stress and ignoring your stressors and the symptoms that you're having? Are you avoiding right now as a way of trying to cope? It's a way of coping, it just happens to be an unhealthy way of coping. Are you procrastinating? Do you have what we call an external locus of control? This is the experience of blaming. And we all tend to know a blamer in our lives. And the blamers, when something happens, immediately focus on everybody else contributing to that problem. So if I have a problem in my life and I have an external locus of control, I'll say that it's everybody else's fault that I have that problem. And why do we do this? Because it feels better. It feels better for me to blame other people for my problem than to have to take responsibility and look at my piece of it. And so initially blaming or having an external locus of control feels better. And what they mean by locus of control is who's in control of it. That problem I have, it's everybody else's fault. The research shows that in the long run, having an external locus of control or blaming is incredibly unhealthy. It keeps us in a chronic stress state, and then that will lead to the high levels of cortisol and so on. So when we are in this high chronic state and we also have this external locus of control of blaming, it will feel like we have no control to fix the problem in the long run. And that's what makes it so unhealthy. If it's everybody else's fault that I have this problem, there's really nothing I can do about it. I'm going to feel very powerless. And so notice if you might have a tendency to be a blamer. That's something we want to shift. Are you giving up on your exercise? If the gyms are closed as a result of the pandemic, are you blowing it off and saying, oh, well, I can't work out. I can't go to the gym. I'm not going to work out. Are you just giving up in that sense? Are you having more impulsive behaviors? Are you lashing out at others? When people are fearful, they lash out and they panic. So are you lashing out at people when normally you wouldn't do that? Are you grinding your teeth? Have you changed your eating? Are you eating too much to numb out those feelings? Or are you under eating because you're so stressed? Are you craving those comfort foods that make us feel good but aren't particularly nutritious or good for us? Are you having trouble sleeping? Maybe you're sleeping too much, maybe you're not sleeping enough. Are you having more arguments with people? Are you neglecting your appearance? Are you staying in your pajamas until 4 o'clock in the afternoon and then finally brushing your teeth because you can kind of get away with it based on the changes in your lifestyle right now? That is not a great thing to do health-wise. So I'm not talking about being vain and having to look fantastic all the time, but just some of the basics. Have you given up your basic hygiene practices? Are you pushing yourself too hard? Now, it's one thing to be motivated and to push yourself, but are you doing it to a point where it's actually unhealthy, that you're not taking your breaks and you're pushing and pushing? Are you zoning out electronically through the phone, through devices, through gaming, through movies? There's a very significant increase of people watching a lot of movies these days. And that can be healthy, but it also can be healthy if we're avoiding life by zoning out electronically. So think about the ways in which you've been coping with this lifestyle of our pandemic that have not been particularly healthy for you. So my question to you is this: do you want to feel better and live a copacetic life? I hope your answer is yes. And if it is, I encourage you to watch part 2 and learn the 50 tips and tricks I have for coping with a pandemic lifestyle.